Uh,
You're ready.
there we go. Thank you. The time is 1:05. I'm calling the February 28th, 2023 meeting of the Albemarle County Architectural Review Board to order. Carolyn, could you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Hancock,
Here.
Mr. Stoner,
Here.
Mr. Matsuno,
Here.
Mr. Henningsen, and Mr. Vanderwerf are absent.
Thank you. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The public may access and participate in the meeting electronically. Instructions for doing so are posted on the Albemarle County website at the Albemarle County calendar. The public has real-time audio-visual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over telephone, both as provided in the lawfully posted meeting notice. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. This meeting is a public record and subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. All speakers, when it is your turn to speak, please first state your name for the record. Applicants who are making presentations, note that your presentation is limited to a total of 15 minutes, which you can divide among your team members. Staff will let us know when the 15 minutes are up. Excuse me. If applicants in the meeting room have team members attending virtually who will need to present, please make that known when you come to the podium. Everyone who is participating virtually, please mute your microphone until it is your turn to speak. Now we'll move on to disclosures. Do any ARB members have anything to disclose?
No.
I do not either. Public comment. Are there any members of the public that want to make a comment about a project that is not on the agenda for review?
I do not have anyone virtually.
Thank you. There are no consent agenda items today. There is one regular review item today. It is ARB 2023-04 Seminole Heights. Chris, are you ready with your presentation?
Yes. 1 second. The application being reviewed today is initial site plan to construct a development consisting of 6 buildings, 3 which will have drive-throughs in addition to associated site improvements. Site is located along Route 29 and is bounded by Berkmar Drive to the west and 2 automotive dealerships to the north and south. The ARB has not reviewed any previous proposals for this site. There are a number of issues with the plan submitted. The placement of the drive-through travelways and equipment adjacent to Route 29 will contribute to paving and equipment being the primary components that will be visible from the entrance corridor. Revising the layout of the site to bring the buildings to front Route 29 would help to better screen the paving and drive-through and use-related equipment from the entrance corridor. One possibility would be bringing the long elevation of building D to front entrance corridor. Another issue is the depth of the planting area along the Route 29 frontage is inconsistent, ranging from 25 feet down to 8 feet. This inconsistent narrow depth and existing utilities along the frontage will not provide for an area that can accommodate plantings that will appropriately screen the paving and drive-through and use-related equipment. Increasing the depth of the planting area adjacent to the entrance corridor will be needed so it can accommodate large shade trees, free and clear utilities. Regarding interior landscaping of the site, increasing the depth of the landscaping strips between buildings D, E, and F will be needed to accommodate trees and shrubs that can help break up the paving adjacent to the entrance corridor. Node building designs have been provided with the submittal, but long elevations can be seen in the site plan, notably the east side of building C. There's currently no planting area shown along the side of the building, and to accommodate a planting area that has sufficient depth for trees, further revisions to the site layout will be necessary. The layout of this plan also does not meet the supplementary regulations of the zoning ordinance for drive-through windows. A special exception to these regulations can be applied for, but staff does not support it as an exception to any of these regulations due to the potential for negative visual impacts on the entrance corridor. To meet some of the regulations the plan is currently not meeting, revisions to the layout site will be needed. Because of the site-related issues that have been detailed in the staff report, we are not recommending approval of the initial site plan at this time. Staff, as alluded to previously, staff also does not recommend approval to any potential request for a special exception to the supplementary regulations for drive-through windows. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Chris. I'll start with Tara. Do you have any questions for staff?
No, Chris, thank you for the clear and thorough review you provided.
Thank you. Frank Stoner.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. I do not have any questions either.
Just curious about the special exception. I think I understand it, but they're not asking for that. You're just saying if they do ask for it,
Correct.
you're not supportive.
It hasn't been applied for yet, but if they do ask for it, that's staff's recommendation on it.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we're at public comment. Carolyn, is there anybody from the public that wishes to? Oh, did I skip? Let me see, let me go back to my notes, apologize.
You want to ask if the applicant has a presentation to make?
I think that's a great idea. Is the applicant online? Can they make their presentation, please?
Yes, I have Justin Ship here. Justin, go ahead and get started.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Schimpf, the engineer for the site. I guess I had forgotten you guys were back down there. I'd been happy to stroll down to the office, but today we'll handle this remotely. I don't have a presentation to give because I do want to give you guys a little background perhaps on this. So we've submitted an initial site plan with the conceptual locations of the 3 drive-throughs, I think are the main point of discussion as far as the preliminary layout. Those, we have users identified, but we haven't gotten so far as to the level of detail that is being requested in some of the staff comments. And we understand those things will be necessary as we get further into it. But I think we were hopeful that we get an initial approval and then come back later, recognizing that the staff is not going to support a special exception if we need to get one. We don't know if we can't. Perhaps we can reverse these things around and make them work. Perhaps we can't. I think we have some traffic circulation issues that may force our hand in this layout more, in which case we'll go to the Board of Supervisors for that exception. I think that would go back through the ARB board as well. So we recognize there's things to work through, but you'll notice, for example, we don't even have a landscape plan yet. So a lot of these comments are things that we just sort of haven't gotten to that level of detail yet. So I think our preference would be, if the board felt reasonable, the items 1 through 8 on the staff list to me are pretty concise. This is what needs to be done moving forward. And we recognize without those things, we'd have to come back to the board for either a review of the changes in the final plan, or if there's a special exception process, look at some of those if we can't comply with these requests. So that's really my main ask is at this point, we don't need to go through the specifics of what so much, but rather process wise, our preference would be to be able to move this start some of our final engineering work. And as we get these specific users pinned down and which actual paths come first, then we can work through these issues. And if we have to come back for a request to change, if we can't comply with these 1 through 8, then we would come back through some kind of other hearing and discuss those with the board at that time. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. That's the reasonable approach. That's certainly our preference. We wouldn't necessarily be prepared to submit revised plans, until we had a little more detail on the specific users.
Thank you, Justin. Now is the time for ARB members to ask questions of the applicant. I'll start with you, Tara.
Well, I guess if you don't have users defined for these final uses yet. How did you kind of get to some of the assumptions that were shown in the plan, like the number of lanes that each of those uses would get, and sort of, could you speak a little bit to that process?
Sure. Most of all of these end users, the drive-through car wash, the restaurant, have some standard things they're looking for. So we operate off their, if you will, their templates, what their preference is. But we recognize that when we go through the whole county process, that may not be possible, and we may need to adjust. But we would kind of tackle that as we know, rather than speculating anything very specific at this moment. So in a broad brush, we want to get approved what we have shown, recognizing that I think the items laid out in like 1 through 8 on the list are requirements. And if we can meet them, we certainly will. If we can't, we'll go back to ask for an exception once we really know what we have to ask for exceptions specifically for. If I could just note also, Peter Ray represents the property owner on this. I don't know, he may have a comment, or if you have any questions, he's the broker and one of the owners of this project, so he could provide insights if there's a question related to what their plans are that I can't answer, just so everyone's aware.
Thank you, Taro. Any more questions?
No.
Frank?
Because my question's for Margaret. If in fact they satisfy the 8 requirements, would there be a need for this to come back to the board?
Well, it would come back as a final site plan. So your action today is on the initial site plan. If you recommend approval of the initial site plan today, it would go with the layout that's there, and you wouldn't be able to require changes to building locations after it.
So Justin, I guess to fulfill the requirement, the 8 requirements, you would have to move 1 or more of these buildings, particularly as it relates to the buffer out front. And I guess what I hear you saying, Margaret, is if we approve the preliminary today, we wouldn't have the ability to request that those be moved.
You couldn't require the
Couldn't
building
require
locations
as
to
part of the
change.
final. Is it? Like. But one of the 8 requirements is to increase the size of the buffer, right?
Yes.
Okay.
If I could jump in, yeah, I'm just a little puzzled by that, because I think there's a question, and I don't know if I see Kevin's in the line there. I think the primary issue with the supplemental regulations is the idea that the drive-throughs would have to enter the opposite direction, which is not something necessarily desirable for site circulation, but not impossible. You could basically flip the car wash so it loads the other direction, and the site layout would be relatively similar. That's why, I guess from my perspective, the layout could generally flow with this particular design with some tweaks. If we increase the depth of the landscape aisle, we may have to lose a little bit of stacking space, or the building gets a little bit shorter. Those are things that we're prepared to deal with just once we have a specific building, footprint. Or that change, for example, may drive us to say, okay, well, car wash user, we're going to need to shorten your building by 10 feet, for example. So I think that's really how I view this list is it's if we were to not comply with these, we'd have to come back to the board. But the way the list reads, at least as I understood it, that we could essentially, if we could comply with these, then the initial could be approved.
We're recommending that the initial plan be revised to show that these conditions are being met. And just to clarify, that there are separate but related issues going on here. There's a review of the proposal according to the entrance quarter design guidelines. There's a separate but related issue related to the special exception. And, they're related, but they are also separate things. The buffer width does relate to having enough space for landscape screening if what's beyond the screening or if what's beyond the buffer really needs to be screened and doesn't just need to be enhanced with landscaping. But there's also a section of that landscape area that is very narrow and very close to utilities. So regardless of what's there, recommending it be expanded so that the large shade trees can be planted there. So again, sort of separate, but all related issues.
Thank you, Margaret. Frank, do you have any more questions for the applicant?
Well, sounds like you'd have to come back for a final anyway, Justin. You have to come back to the board regardless. It's the impression I got.
The site plan process is a two-step process.
Yeah.
Start with an initial, come back with a final. Because at the initial stage, you don't have any of the architecture, so you need to come back and deal with the architecture as well as the rest of the site layout.
Yeah, I think it would make a three-step for us. We'd have to have a second initial plan is I think what I'm trying to avoid. The final obviously has to be done when we have specific architecture, et cetera. But I was trying to avoid that second meeting for a initial site plan, provided that we're given a list of things we have to comply with, which I feel like the list is fairly concise that we can do it, but up to the board here, but that's certainly our perspective.
So would they have the option to go straight to a final on a resubmittal, or would they have to resubmit a?
If the initial plan is approved, their next step is a final.
But if the initial is not approved, he can't submit a final.
Correct.
I see.
Is there ever an opportunity or an option if we do not approve the initial site plan that the revised initial site plan could be reviewed by staff and not come back to the ARB, or does it always have to come back?
We've never done that. I suppose your action could direct that to happen.
Okay. We're kind of veering outwards in the questions for the applicant stage. We can close that up. I don't have any questions. Do you have any more questions,
No,
Frank?
no.
Thank you, Justin. I don't have any more questions. I guess we'll go ahead and open it up for discussion. Tara, you want to start?
Sure. I guess to me, I do feel that the entrance corridor guidelines are pretty well documented and publicly available. So I guess given that this is at a very preliminary stage of design, I think I would have preferred to see an initial site plan, even at a very schematic level, at least comply with some of the basic requirements in terms of building orientation and landscaping area. And I guess, so I'm a little, I don't know, annoyed, I guess, that those conditions aren't being met at this early stage of review. Having said that, if these can be resolved for a future submission, I think they're pretty elementary aspects of our guidelines that could be met and potentially reviewed by staff. But I do feel like I don't hear a compelling reason why this submission didn't necessarily meet those requirements in the first place, or at least attempt to address them, is kind of my feeling.
Thank you, Tara. Frank?
Yeah, I would echo some of your sentiments. I understand they don't have specific tenants for some of these uses. But it would have been nice if at least the basic guidelines had been sort of incorporated into this conceptual plan. That said, I'm not opposed to the idea if they meet the 8 requirements of having staff review and approve the preliminary. If it's possible under the rules and regs. I don't know how much time that saves, but I do appreciate that time is an issue sometimes.
Thank you. I agree with both of my fellow board members. I think it might set a precedent that you can kind of just submit what you want and still get approval with initial site plan. I think Tara, you make a great point that these are kind of the fundamental, and in my experience, when we've approved an initial site plan with recommendations, the recommendations are often pretty, I don't want to say trivial, but they're not as, fundamental to our guidelines as like the frontage of the buildings and kind of the site layout. You get that stuff right. And then you could kind of zero in on a few things as recommendations. So I think if it's an option for, staff level review on a resubmittal, it sounds like we'd be open to that, but I don't want to create more work for staff, or if that's,
Yeah,
breaking procedure.
that wouldn't be more work for staff necessarily, but I'm just checking the language in the ordinance related to the initial site plan, and I think it specifically references that it needs to be an ARB action, so I'm not sure if the ARB action can be, let somebody else do it.
And do I have this right, Margaret? Did we use, or have in the past, have we just forwarded our recommendations and not approved, or?
You're making a recommendation to the agent for the site review committee, but
But we need to approve or not approve as part of that recommendation.
that's right.
Okay. I have some memory of us getting off easier before, where we would just make all these recommendations and not provide an approval, or I don't know if I'm misremembering that, but
That may have been when we were doing preliminary then final rather than
Oh,
the
okay.
switch to initial. And I am just not finding the language that I'm looking for. Best. Bear with me for a minute.
And I guess I'm not an expert in the sort of brokerage, like finding a tenant for these kinds of projects side of things, but my sense is that if you went out with the site plan as drawn, that somebody would end up disappointed that they wouldn't be able to, have as many travel lanes or whatever for their car wash business, because they're going to come back to us and, we're not going to approve a final site plan with those conditions, right? I mean, I feel like it, to me at least, it seems like it would be better to have something on paper that is relatively close to something that meets the guidelines that we can approve later on.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah, I would agree with it.
What I would recommend is that if you're wanting to see these changes in the initial plan, take an action that says you don't recommend approval of the initial plan without those changes, and if possible, staff can take care of that review. So that would leave it open. If it's really not consistent with the ordinance, then we would bring it back to you.
Okay. Do we want to see it
That's
again?
fair,
Does
yeah.
anybody, does that sound okay?
Sounds okay. to me.
Yeah, I think we could still deny it at the final site plan if it
Right.
doesn't, if it really doesn't comply.
Well,
Uh,
can you? Let's say it comes back for staff review, staff approves of the preliminary, they come back with a final that's consistent with the preliminary. Not sure we have the ability to deny it at that.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, the when we changed the process from the preliminary and final to the initial, a major part of that goal was to allow the ARB to have early comment on the layout of the site to make sure that that was right, and that once that's approved, then the major elements of the site layout won't change.
They would have to come back for architecture, however, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so that's
But-
a separate,
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
but we could deny that.
But wouldn't we, but we wouldn't be able to speak to the building locations, for
No,
instance?
right.
Yeah.
Correct.
I would still stick with our initial recommendation that the plan come back to you for review. But we can try that alternative route if that's what you all prefer.
Could you put the 8
Yeah, I was about to-
recommendations on the board, just so I
can-
can see them?
about to add, there's some 1 through 8 has some layout related ones, so there could be some opportunity to pick out some of those. But there are some core ones that are related to layout.
What are the time implications of a resubmittal preliminary? And full A or B review as opposed to staff review? Is it
Submittal
paper?
deadline days are same as
Same.
ARB meeting days, twice a month, first and third Mondays, and there's generally 6 weeks between submittal deadline and meeting day. Sometimes that changes when there's 5 Mondays in a month.
And if staff were to do the review, how long would that process?
It could be slightly quicker, but we still look at the scheduled meeting day as the last day
Deadline.
for approval or last day for review comments.
Okay, do we have any adjustments to these recommendations? No.
No, no changes to I think they all seem reasonable.
Chris, do you have a recommended motion or is it within this?
Sorry, it's Chris's screen, not mine, but the motion would be to move to forward the recommendations outlined in the staff report to the agent for the site review committee.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Carolyn, could you please call the vote?
Yes. Mr. Matsuno,
Aye.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock.
Aye,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you, Justin. You're still on. Now we move to work sessions. There's one work session today. It is on the entrance corridor design guidelines addenda. Do we still want to do this? I know there was some discussion about,
It's up to y'all. If you think that it would be better to have the full board here, we can postpone it to the next meeting and just add it to that agenda. Or if you all want to move forward now, that's fine too.
how does that agenda look?
It's not that long.
Okay, just for, so Chris and Dade see it. Do you want to hold and review it at the next meeting or
Couldn't they still see it?
get to?
If we held a work session today, would they still have the opportunity for review and comment?
They can always send us their comments, sure.
Yeah, then let's go ahead and look at it.
Okay,
I mean,
is that all right, Tara?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Perfect. Welcome, Mariah. Thank you.
Okay, and I can keep this short. Let's plug in. Sorry. Okay. Okay. There we go. Okay, so today we have 2 corridors for you. One is just the revised area of Route 250 East, acknowledging the changing in the designations of arterial status. And then Route 654, which is the Barracks Road. area. So this is the revised Route 250 East corridor sheet. Again, the change here is that the arterial status was, or designation was given from previously. This corridor ended at the Route 22 Louisa Road in Shadwell, and it's now been extended to the Fluvanna County line, acknowledging that we've incorporated the information for that additional area. So additions include the history and development of the Glenmore Estate, which started to be developed in the 1990s into what is now the Village of Rivanna, which is a county development area. So the extended area lent itself to a single segment. This segment is primarily rural in character, with an exception around Glenmore Way, where the Village of Rivanna development area is located. Although the master plan for the development area recommends low density housing and green areas along the roadway, so not shockingly incompatible with the rural character of the area in general. Do you have a question? You seem confused, Frank. Is that?
No.
Just how I always look, Mariah. No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, okay. Feel free to ask. This is the precedent image sheet for the Glenmore segment. We provided typical views from the corridor as well as images of various buildings along the segment. So next we'll go to the Route 654, locally known as Barracks Road. The extent of this segment is from the 250 bypass to Georgetown Road, which is approximately 1/4 of a mile in length. We did not break this segment down or this corridor into segments. Overall, the stretch is pretty homogeneous, or that wasn't the word I was looking for, but it is all residential. It demonstrates a mix of residential developments from single family detached to multifamily apartment structures, predominantly oriented away from the street or buffered from it by fencing or vegetation. The property on the north side of the street sits at a higher elevation. So in some areas that's supported by retaining walls. And then this is the precedent sheet for the corridor. You can see the retaining walls, some of which are made more interesting by made more interesting and softer by creative murals. So those are the two small segments that we have for you today to review. Again, this is just incorporating the areas of the county or the corridors in the county that were given that arterial status recently. So we're just trying to bring everything up to date.
Thank you, Mariah. Taro, do you have any questions?
I have to sort of go back in my mind exactly what's on this part of the corridor, but I guess just trying to think if there are any images we can provide that are good examples to potential applicants along this small segment of corridor, because I think a lot of them, the ones we've shown, it's hard to like point to one and be like, this is an example of what's something great on this corridor, you know, at least with the imagery we've shown.
The architecture is largely obscured, so it would be hard for applicants to maybe pull out features. Although there's actually a question there about, you know, what architectural features are important along this stretch of mixed residential development.
Right, especially it looks like there's still a fair amount of single family homes which aren't like part of this. So I guess it's a little bit of a shame to see like a fence and then like no sidewalk along the side of Barracks Road and feel like this is the character of the corridor necessarily, you know. But maybe that's what's there. I don't know.
Go back to the narrative from, yeah. Figure 18. Yeah, I guess to piggyback on your comment, you know, with the fact that we show a picture with an unstained, weathered privacy fence that I assume is 5 feet tall. Is that a implicit endorsement of that as an acceptable characteristic on the corridor, or?
Just in the other
I-
ones, they're mixed
yeah.
in with like nice photographs of rolling landscapes or whatever. And then like there's this one garage or parking lot or something that doesn't conform. But then I think when you look at it all on one page, it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, the segment is short. It's 1/4 of a mile. So this fence and its length was actually a considerable part of that corridor. But it doesn't have to be necessarily. That was the observation.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess if the fence wore out and they tore it down and then wanted to put back something similar, would we approve it?
I suppose we could reword the caption and talk more about what a appropriate replacement would be. If a situation like that occurred.
Have we included characteristics to avoid or something like?
Yeah, it is. It's in the previous, and you mentioned retaining walls that offer no scale or texture.
Do we show example images sometimes maybe of characteristics to avoid? Maybe that's what we have here.
I mean, it's kind of a tough call because you understand if you're living on a corridor that has that much traffic, you know,
Yeah, you don't want
a
to
fence might
yeah.
actually feel pretty good if
Mhm.
it's your house.
but you might want, 4 feet of space and a
Right,
little
right.
planting buffer or something on the other side of it. It's
Yeah,
that
sidewalk
balancing
on the
act.
other side would be nice.
Maybe we
That's a
could,
tough one.
maybe we could find images to do a comparison where one is the fence that's right up on the road and one that has some sidewalk and do it more like a comparison.
We could also include more of the single family detached that that have a landscape buffer instead of a fence buffer,
Right.
and
that's a good
use
point.
that as an offsetting mechanism.
You could say like
Uh,
other properties feature a landscape
Right,
buffer.
right.
That's part of even though it's not something we'd review, it's part of the character of the corridor, you could say. Just like we're not going to review a rolling hill landscape, but you still put it in the book.
Right.
Then I guess there's a question regarding the mural. The process by which a mural would get approved. Or would a mural even come to the ARB?
It would depend where where it would be painted.
Like this mural here.
Excuse me.
So if the retaining wall was in the right of way, then I would say no, it wouldn't need approval. If it's on a building, that's
I remember this came up with the Starbucks.
it's a Starbucks, yeah. So if
But I think
it's-
did they take it off and not end up proposing it?
They removed it from the proposal and said they might come back at a future time with it. So if it's a mural to be painted on a building that has gone through the ARB process or is going through the ARB process, then that would become part of the review.
But if the structure is pre-existing, you're saying it would not come to the ARB?
I think if the painting in it of itself does not require a permit, so if it's not part of a previous
Excuse
ARB
me.
action, then I don't know how,
Oh, step what?
I can't think of how it might get to the ARB.
I wonder in this case, I assume that retaining walls in the right of way?
That's my guess.
So does this EDOT have to approve that or?
I would guess so.
That's in the county. We're in the county here. We're close to the line.
Right.
Guess, do you have a feeling on murals one way or the other, or just curious about the process, or?
Well, I guess another question related, if it's in the right of way. VDOT, let's say VDOT wanted to build the retaining wall that's shown on the upper left as part of a road plan, would that come to the ARB or not? You have any ability to rule on a state?
If the road plan is related to a site plan. Then I would say yes, but
Not VDOT can do whatever they want, pretty much.
both of those, well, and I think the site in the upper left-hand corner, that predates the establishment of the entrance corridor.
Oh, sorry to digress, and just curiosity.
Excuse me. All my comments were coughs for the record. Hopefully they all got recorded.
Thanks gagging
Yeah,
in the whole
sorry about that.
prospect.
No, I love murals. No, that has nothing to do with murals. Thank you, Mariah. I don't have any further comments. Nice work. Anything else before we move on?
I don't know, I guess like a nicer retaining wall would be nicest, and then I guess not great retaining wall with a mural is above that and then, or below that, and then, I don't know.
I mean, the problem is Mariah said it's only a quarter mile, so it's not like, there's not a lot of opportunity for.
No, I
Well-
mean, in this case, the retaining wall kind of reinforces our retaining wall requirements or of this, tiered can only be so tall. This kind of makes the case for why we ask applicants to do that.
What we could do is reorder the pictures to put the, what we would like to see at the top and what we wouldn't like to see at the bottom. And by adding more images, the images will inherently shrink to fit on the page.
Sure.
So, they won't be as, they won't have as much real estate on the sheet.
Like murals enliven the retaining wall, et cetera, and then typical projects reviewed by the ARB use a tiered structure or something like that. Is that like in terms of the language for that blurb?
Oh,
Like it would be like murals enliven the retaining wall, retaining walls in the corridor areas typically, step back at given heights or something like that.
mhm. I'm not sure of the height of that. It might be that it is within the 6-foot height.
On the previous page, it talks, maybe the language about that wall that's on the previous page under characteristics to avoid could.
No scale or texture, segmenting retaining walls to, I don't know if there's a typical like 4 feet or something.
Where you have to step back.
Yeah. I don't think we have a specific
6.
guideline on that. 6?
The site plan requirements require the maximum height of retaining walls per the ordinance is 6 feet. So at that point, you'd have to kind of offset.
Okay, so then maybe that could just be in the characteristics to avoid.
Any other comments?
I guess, again, sort of a hypothetical, to the extent that the existing site characteristics in a corridor are not desirable for the most part, and we envision trying to improve those over time. Could some of the images in fact be from someplace other than the corridor that's being examined? If you wanted to, if there are no good examples in that corridor of kind of what you'd like to see.
I think that almost gets to the next step of this, or this step, I think, was the encapsulating vision was to acknowledge what is there, what is compatible, what does consistency mean based on what is there now. And then a future goal of having a full-blown revision to the entrance corridor guidelines that kind of establishes a vision and is able to have public comment on it because it is private property. In some ways, I think if you're going to establish a vision, it kind of needs input a little bit. But I will say that's a personal thing. So maybe that's not how it needs to be. But I think that's almost, to your point, that's almost getting into what we had been thinking of as the next step after the addenda is done.
Yeah, I think for these ones, it's just that maybe we could incorporate more examples for the corridor. But yeah, I think you're right. Like, yeah, there's a broader question of what we want to achieve in these corridors. For this one, maybe it's just like, there's some stuff that we could also include in the character of this corridor that maybe speaks to our aspirational values
Desirable,
as
right,
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a very timely one. And I think we're all kind of ready for the next step. We've seen about 90 pages of this document so far, and I think we're ready for the next step. But the tension is real.
Thank you, Mariah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Mariah.
Moving on to other business, approval of the February 6, 2023 minutes. Do we have a motion to adopt these minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Carolyn, could you please call the vote?
Yes, Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Mitsuno.
Aye.
Thank you.
Other items, do any board members have any other items or staff have any other items that you wish to discuss?
No.
Our next meeting is scheduled for March 6, 2023. This will be an in-person. Do you know of your plans on March 6th? You'll be able to attend.
I do not. No,
You're not sure, or
March
you are
6th?
not gonna attend?
I'm not. Well, actually, March 6th. Yeah, I probably won't attend.
I will not be here March 6th.
There
Okay.
might be a quorum issue, I guess.
Next Monday. That's when our next meeting is, next Monday.
Yeah, is that already the 6th? I am planning to attend.
I'll check with the others.
Okay. Great. So that concludes our meeting. The meeting is adjourned to the next meeting on March 6th. The time is 1:51 PM. I could probably look on my phone to see that. but prefer to squint at the clock on the wall.